right. So, and I'll, okay, so greetings everyone. I'm Mila Stroganoff, host and programs director for the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park. Our next program is our next program in December will be J.R. Blair from San Francisco State University, who will discuss and explain what mushrooms are and the world underneath the topsoil, which we never get to see very much of. And he's scheduled to come on Saturday, December the 12th at 4 p.m., our usual time. So please put that on your calendars, and I hope everyone can join us. There'll be, there's also the Friends website, Friends of San Pedro Valley Park.org. You should go on that and see what we're all up to, the Friends, that is, and about the park. There's lots of photos and stuff. So please look up the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park.org and have a look. I have the privilege of having Dr. John Dumbacher with us. He's agreed to come and speak to us and about owls, yes. And so Dr. Dumbacher is curator of birds and mammals at the California Academy of Sciences and professor of biology at San Francisco State University. He has been working on California barred owls since 2006. In addition to the barred owl work, Dr. Dumbacher studies the genetics and relationships of birds from Asia, New Guinea, and Galapagos, and also studies some of the world's only poisonous birds, the pitowi and Ifrita of New Guinea. So that's another talk that we might have to ask him to come back for. Who would think poisonous birds, huh? So anyway, I will turn this over to Jack and disappear for a while.
Great. Thank you, Mila. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, and it's great to be here. I'm going to share my screen now. You should be able to see my talk. There we go. So I'm Jack Dumbacher. I'm curator of birds and mammals at the California Academy of Sciences, and I study all kinds of things, but I've become really interested in this dilemma about forest owls after a couple of years. I'll talk a bit more about how I got involved in this, but it's been a very interesting project for me and really has challenged me in lots of interesting ways. And I'm going to try my best to challenge you too. And so even though we're talking about owls here, I think that we could, substitute any number of different species here and, think about the dilemmas of, how much do you invest in saving a particular species and how far are you willing to go? And I think that these will be very important questions as we move forward. But today, we're going to be talking about northern spotted owls. We sometimes call them Strix occidentalis caurinas. That's the Latin name. And they're beautiful mid-sized forest owls. Chocolate brown owl with spotting on the head, neck, back, and underparts, which is where they get their name. Like most raptors, the male is actually smaller than the female. The female can be 50% larger than the male, and that allows them not to compete so much so that the females can catch slightly larger prey. They're a little bit tougher, and you find this to be the case in many different raptor species. They're restricted to areas with large, thick forests, and they usually need a little bit of an old growth stand or very big trees in order to have a good nest tree that they'll be able to raise their young in. They usually roost in cool, shady spots near streams or on the lower third of slopes, and they have very large home ranges, 1,500 acres, but they can be up to 3,000 acres in size. And they're usually recognized by their call more than seeing them because they're mostly active at night. And they give a 4-note hoot, which sounds like this. Ooh, 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 ooh. And so that's what you listen for. They also give a couple of other little chuckles and barks and other calls, but that's the main one that you would hear and recognize as the northern spotted owl. Now, because they're owls, they forage mostly at night. They're sit and wait predators, so they can sit in our forests and just listen. And when they hear something moving around in the undergrowth or in the leaves, they can fly down and get it. Their food is mostly small rodents like dusky-footed wood rats and northern flying squirrels. More than 90% of their diet is composed of those two species. But they can eat a lot of other things, and they can even hawk and capture bats on the wing, and they do eat smaller birds and a few other things, although it's not a big part of their diet. Now, there are 3 different subspecies of spotted owls. The northern spotted owl, let me see if I can, whoops, let me do that. I think I can get, here we go. So I have a little laser pointer here. So the northern spotted owl is found from British Columbia through Washington, Oregon, and down the coast of California. The California spotted owl is found in the Sierras from the Pitt River on south, and then you also find it in some of the Sky Islands of the desert and back north along the coast, all the way up as far as where you are in Pacifica. Although I don't know that there's too many recent sightings of them in your area. The Mexican spotted owl is the 3rd subspecies, which is found in the Sky Islands of the desert Southwest, where you find forests, but also down in Mexico. But we're going to be focusing mostly on the northern spotted owl, which is a listed subspecies. So it is listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, as is the Mexican spotted owl. Now, California spotted owl is not yet listed, but it's often petitioned for listing. And it hasn't been yet because everyone's trying to avoid that, but it may be at some point in the future. Let me see if I can go to the next slide there. Let's see. So if we look at eBird records, and this is a data citizen science database, you can see that spotted owls are found all the way down to San Francisco. This is the northern spotted owl, but you do get the California spotted owl coming all the way up into the Santa Cruz Mountains. And even if we zoom in, it won't give us any more resolution because these are protected species, so it won't divulge their exact location. So I couldn't find any evidence that they were right in your park, but they could be if there's some good low habitat in the lower slopes, especially around creeks. They could very well occur there, although mostly they're going to be in the redwood forests of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And also these are some other citizen science data and museum records. So I don't even have any museum records from recent times, but like I said, they would appreciate that forest habitat that you get in the Santa Cruz Mountains. But you can see that they're quite common up the coast, and then the California spotted owl down the coast and in these Sky Islands that you find in Southern California. So a little history. Many of you will remember the listing of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1990. When the northern spotted owl was listed. It was listed because of population declines of northern spotted owl. So the populations were all plummeting, and because of destruction of critical habitat. And so I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of data here. So based on the data that the demographers had on spotted owls in 1990, they were able to estimate this thing called the annual rate of population change, or lambda. Okay, which range from 0.8 to 0.98. So what lambda is it's the rate of growth. If it's 1, that means that every individual is replacing itself with one individual from the next population, so that the population is level. Okay, anything that's greater than 1 you can think of as like interest in your bank, and anything that's less than 1, it's as if the difference between 1 and lambda is you taking money out of your account, or you're spending principal off of your savings account. So think of it like that. And so just to put these numbers in perspective, so it doesn't look like they're declining that much, 0.82 to 0.984, but that actually on average comes to a 3.9% annual decline. So if we looked at what this might look like, if we use those values of lambda, so the highest value of lambda was 0.984, which is about 1.6% per year of the population you're losing. And that's what you can expect to see over 30 years. And remember, we're at 2020 right now, and they were listed in 1990. So this is about where we would expect to be population-wise, that we would be down to about 60% of the population. A more accurate estimate is the mean, okay? And this would suggest that after 30 years, we're down to about 30% of the starting population. And that is probably more in line with what we're actually seeing on the landscape. So that's a huge decline, and that should worry us quite a bit. Now, some of the populations, especially those in the north, had this lowest lambda of all, okay? And so this was about 0.82, which means that, you know, they're losing almost 20% of the population per year. And so if we look at what that would look like, that, you know, by now these populations would almost be extinct, or just have a small number of individuals remaining. And that's what we see in Washington state, some areas in Washington state. So this is pretty alarming, right? These are pretty alarming projections, and this is why they were listed at the time. So under the Endangered Species Act, listed species are supposed to be reviewed every 5 years to see if they still deserve being listed, or if they should be uplisted or downlisted. And, you know, in 2003, there had still not been any sort of review of the northern spotted owl. And so the industry, the timber industry and mining industries, brought a lawsuit challenging the listing. And they said, well, you know, it's been 13 years and populations are continuing to decline despite logging. So clearly our efforts not logging aren't doing any good. And we should, and their argument was, we should delist them, or we should open logging back up again. Okay, and there was also some evidence that the genetic data questioned whether the northern spotted owl was actually a valid subspecies. And so a 5-year status review was initiated in 2003. So in 2003, the demographers now had much more data, and they were able to pull all the data together and look and see, you know, are they still declining, and how are the owls doing? And in fact, 12 of the 13 study areas still had declining populations. The mean for the 8 Northwest Forest Plan areas was 0.976. So this is the decline that they were seeing in the Northwest Forest areas since 1990, okay? So again, that was suggesting that in 2003, you know, they were down to 65% of the population. But by now, in 2020, even the best performing populations, you know, are down to around 45% of the population. And those areas that weren't as well protected, that weren't part of the Northwest Forest Plan, were declining at a much higher rate, at about 5.8% per year. And their decline follows this line a little bit more clearly. And so, you know, we're looking in 2020 at, you know, less than 20% of the population that they started with in 1990, which was already experiencing declines. So I just want to, you know, put this in perspective. You know, we always talk about, oh, the species is in decline, and what does that really mean? And this is what it means. These are the graphs that are trying to summarize those numbers and put this into perspective for you. And they look pretty darn dire. They do, at least to me. Okay. And so, you know, so one of the findings of the review was that, yes, they are still in decline, but those areas that are under protection are doing better than those areas that aren't under protection. And they also looked at some other data. And one of them was this paper that asked, well, are barred owls displacing spotted owls? And what they were finding was, this is 1974, 76, and you can see that as the years went on, they started to see barred owls appearing on the landscape. And this lower line is how many new barred owl territories appeared each year. And this one shows the cumulative number. So that, you know, in 74 to 76, there's virtually no barred owls on the landscape that they were studying. But, you know, by 1998, you know, there were, you know, almost 700 on the landscape. So that's a pretty huge increase. And in addition to that, a lot of the landowners and land managers who were doing these studies also had data that looked like this, that as barred owls were moving into the landscape, spotted owls were decreasing. And so a lot of people said, well, here we go. You know, it looks like the barred owl is driving out the spotted owl. But scientists being scientists, we were critical, and having a correlation like this does not necessarily mean causation. So it could be that the spotted owls are disappearing on their own, and the barred owls are just filling in that empty habitat. And that might actually be a good thing, because then at least there's a medium-sized owl on the landscape doing what medium-sized owls do. The other alternative is that the barred owls are actually moving in and pushing the spotted owls out. And that was the concern that a lot of the scientists had, and they wanted more data. So the scientific evaluation of the status report that was done in 2003 was that barred owls are invasive species. They may have competitive effects. But while all panelists thought this was a potential threat, some panelists felt that the scientific case for the effects of barred owls remained inconclusive, and other panelists were more certain on the issue. And so the major threats to northern spotted owls at this time include the effects of past and current timber harvests, the loss of habitat due to fire, because that was becoming an issue even in 2003, and barred owls. And there were some other threats that were also present. But this was the first time that barred owls were recognized as an issue. So who are these barred owls anyway, and how did they come to the Western United States? So this is a picture of a barred owl. Notice that they're from the same genus, they're Strix varia. So they're pretty close relatives of northern spotted owls. They're large, chocolate brown woodland owls, slightly larger than barred owl, but not that much larger. And because they're so closely related, they're very ecologically similar to northern spotted owls. They're more aggressive than spotted owls and not quite as tame. But they, like spotted owls, prefer mature old growth forests, and they need forests to do well. Although they can also do very well in mixed deciduous conifer forests. There are 4 different subspecies of barred owls, and the one that we get in the West is Strix varia, and it's the more common form from the eastern United States. These owls are non-migratory, and they're primarily an owl of the eastern United States, Mexico, and Canada. Now, this is the barred owl range taken from my first field guide, the 1983 edition of the Golden Field Guide of North American Birds, and you'll see that at that time, they were moving into the Western United States, but they really still hadn't gotten into spotted owl territory at all. They weren't in the coastal areas yet. But by the year 2000, this is what the range map looks like. And this is from Birds of North America. And you'll see that they made it all the way to the coast. They're in the panhandle of Alaska, as well as Washington, Oregon, and almost all the way to the Golden Gate. In fact, the first ones were sighted in 2002 in Marin County. And they're also moving down the Sierra Nevada. By now, if you look at eBird records, this is what we see as the range. So they're almost they're all the way up in the Yukon, almost to the main part of Alaska. They're up in the Northwest Territory, so they moved up northward quite a ways, and they're all the way as far south as Bakersfield in the south. But they haven't jumped over the Golden Gate, and as far as I know, we don't have them on the south coast of California, south of the Golden Gate yet. Although everyone's holding their breath because that's likely to happen very soon. In fact, there have been records in Concord, and even one sighted in Davis. And you wouldn't typically think of that as forested habitat, but they were doing quite well on the golf course there. And these are all records in the Sierra Nevada moving south. And you can see how dense they've become in the coast areas of California. And here's a map of records in Marin County. So there's quite a few in Marin County now too. So after that meeting in 2003 and 2004, biologists all said, we've got to figure out what is going on with the barred owls and spotted owls and how the two are interacting. And so there were 2 different types of studies that were proposed. One, the first one that they said, could be done fairly easily are ecological studies, just getting out on the landscape and studying what these 2 different owl species are doing and trying to figure out, if they might be competing or if they're interacting directly. But a lot of the scientists said, the most important thing to do would be a removal experiment where you actually go into some areas, remove barred owls, and then see if the spotted owls do better in those areas where barred owls are removed versus the areas where they're not removed. But in those first meetings, you know, some of the other biologists said the problem is that both barred owls and spotted owls are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in North America, and so you can't just go out there and remove them. And I happened to be one of the scientists on the panel, and I raised my hand and I said, you know, I work at a museum, and one of the things that museum biologists do is try and document, you know, species and species ranges and species occurrence and what species are doing. And I said, right now, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I have a permit that would allow me to collect up to 25 barred owls. And I said, if you would like to do this kind of a removal experiment, I would be happy to remove the barred owls and bring them to the museum where we could do other studies with them, as long as you were able to do those follow-up studies. And even the people from Fish and Wildlife Service, they scratched their head and they said, yeah, I guess even though, you know, it's not allowed, we can issue permits for scientific studies. And so that was when they started thinking about trying to do a real scientific study. And so those first scientific studies had begun in 2006. And the goal of those experiments was to document barred owls in the Western United States and have specimens in museums that could be studied. But we also wanted to test is how do the spotted owls respond to barred owl removals? And another question that land managers had was, can barred owls be efficiently removed from spotted owl reserves? Because they're already starting to think about, well, if it does turn out that barred owls are a key factor, is management of barred owls an option? Okay. So the first experiments, I actually was able to help out with these and take part. And they actually didn't want me to use my standard scientific collecting permit, but they issued a special permit just to do this work. And all the different partners came together to design a very strong experiment. And we worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wairika office. And we did our removals from this area called Goose Nest in Northern California. Now, all of the areas where we were going to remove owls should be paired territory holding barred owls. So not barred owls that just are moving around, but barred owls who have settled, are defending a territory, and are nesting and raising young. And all of these had to be on territories that were formerly occupied by spotted owls. So where spotted owls were pushed out putatively. And in that area, we collected 11 barred owls for the study. We also partnered with a timber industry, actually, and I was a little bit uncomfortable about this, not having worked with the timber industry, but we worked with Green Diamond, natural resources company in Humboldt. They're a small landowner around Humboldt. Their land here is shown in pink and yellow, and they had the treated areas, which is where barred owls would be removed, and then the untreated areas in pink where barred owls would not be removed. And the only ones that we removed had to be paired territory holding barred owls on territories formerly occupied by spotted owls. And we removed 20 owls in this initial pilot study in work with Green Diamond. Now, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to mince words here about what this is. This is not pretty work, and it's not work that any of us really like to do. And what we used a caller that would call the barred owls call. This would call the barred owls in, and when they were close enough, and this is not sport hunting, right? So we wanted to get them on a tree close enough that we could shoot them with a 12-gauge shotgun and make sure that we had an instant kill, because we didn't want any birds to suffer during this. It was already hard enough to have to go out there and shoot these owls. In fact, some of the partners, you know, said that they could never do this kind of work, but after doing a little bit of it, they felt very comfortable that it was a well-designed experiment, and that, you know, it was a quick removal. Once the owls were shot, they were brought in, and field measurements, data were collected, information about our effort, how long were we in the field, what calls did we use, what guns did we use, what other equipment did we use. We took full tissues for studies using DNA, RNA to look for environmental contaminants, diseases of the owls, etc., all kinds of things. And this is very standard protocol now in museums. Even though most of what we add to the museums is what we call salvage, these are all tissues and samples that we take. And then the entire carcass was frozen, brought back to the California Academy of Sciences. And these are the typical stuffed birds that we would make with them. So we would sometimes do a spread wing for studies of molt. The whole bird carcass was stuffed with cotton. It has a tag with all of the field data and all of the other laboratory data that we would collect. Stomach contents were collected in vials like this, and all the internal organs, tissues, and bones were all also collected and stored in other bottles. So we saved everything from these owls for scientific studies. And I'll talk a little bit more about how they've been used later in the talk. So one of the first questions was, are removals costly or too time prohibitive? Because some folks thought, oh, it'll be impossible to do removals. These are night flying birds. It's really hard to get out into the field. And what we were able to show is that the average time in the field to remove an owl was only about an hour for females and a little bit longer for males. But this also relied on the fact that we had partners in the field who'd studied these owls, and they knew exactly where the territory center was. So we were able to go to the territory center and collect the males and females, usually within just a couple of hours in a single night. So it didn't take that much time, and it wasn't cost prohibitive. The important question is, do spotted owls recover after the removals? And so this is kind of a text-heavy slide, but I'll just walk you through this. So there were, in Green Diamond Land, there were 9 territories that met the criteria for removal. So after the barred owls removed, all of the historical spotted owl sites were reoccupied by spotted owls. And the time for reoccupation ranged from 13 days to 152 days. And 13 days was just the first time people went back. So they could have come back even earlier. So the first thing that we found was that once you remove the barred owls, spotted owls come back, and they come back quickly. Now, interestingly, 4 of those sites were reoccupied by the original resident spotted owls, including one female that hadn't been seen for 7 years. And that suggests that even though the spotted owls have disappeared and they're not responding to calls and they're not nesting, they're still there. They haven't been killed and they haven't died off in many cases. And partially that's because, those areas, the barred owls haven't been there for that long. But that was really encouraging, that the spotted owls were still there. They were still hanging on, but they needed to have a territory that they could breed on. And the rest were occupied by new or unknown spotted owls, which also suggests that there's still lots of spotted owls in the matrix, so to speak, that haven't settled on a territory, that will grab a territory when one becomes open. Interestingly, spotted owls were again displaced at 3 of those sites, and barred owls were again removed, okay? And in removal areas, the spotted owl occupancy was increasing, but in control areas, the spotted owl occupancy continued to decline. So that answered pretty much all of our questions. So we found that removal was feasible, not too costly. The spotted owls responded favorably, and they did well. They were able to do well and move back into these areas once the barred owls were removed. The numbers of barred owls did decrease in the removals, but it was just a very small area that we did it. And that the fecundity, so the breeding rates and the survival rates of spotted owls, appeared significantly higher in the removal areas. So now that was as far as I was involved, because after this, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service designed new studies and began working on Green Diamond lands, and with the mindset of creating a much larger range-wide study some years later. Okay, and at this point, they took over all that work. And we worked as a museum to try and take all of the specimens that they were collecting so that we could at least make some use of the carcasses once they were removing all these owls. Okay, so that's kind of where we got from that. So then one of the questions is well, can barred owl removals lead to spotted owl recovery? So this second study that was done on Green Diamond land was published by Lowell Diller. Now he was the Green Diamond owl biologist, and he was a very good biologist and a professor at Humboldt State University, and he published all of his data regardless of whether it was good for the timber industry or bad for the timber industry. So he was a very well trusted and respected partner. And he published this paper, The Demographic Response of Northern Spotted Owls to Barred Owl Removals in coastal Northern California in 2016. And here, what you see is spotted owl occupancy, which was going down year to year. So each year, spotted owls were disappearing from their forests, okay? And they were managing their forests as best they could for spotted owls to survive and do well. And they were one of the first partners that realized, hey, these barred owls are moving in. And one of the reasons why we're failing to help the spotted owls is because we think the barred owls are there. And so you can see this is the point, 2009 and 2010 is the point at which they began their removal experiments. And then here the squares are the barred owl occupancies in areas where, the spotted owl occupancies in areas where the barred owls were removed. And then this is what the spotted owl occupancies are like where the barred owls are not removed. So what you can see is that spotted owls begin to recover as soon as you remove the barred owls, and numbers begin to increase. So not only are they holding on, but they're actually increasing in number. So that lambda is greater than 1. But in that area where the barred owls still are allowed to remain and where the barred owls are spreading, the spotted owls are in decline, and in a greater decline than ever. Around the same time, Katie Duggar and her teams were also looking at the demography data from Washington, Oregon, and other parts of Northern California. And again, this is looking at that lambda, and you can see that the owl populations in the far north, where barred owls have been the longest, are doing the poorest, and the lambda is the smallest. So this means that they're losing almost 10% of the population each year. Okay, and the lambda goes up a little bit as you go further south because the barred owls haven't been there as long, and the barred owls aren't as high in numbers. But interestingly, let me see if I can, I don't know if this is in the way for you. But what you can see here is that the only area where the lambda was greater than 1 is this one right here, which is the Green Diamond Resources area, the treatment area. Okay, so that's where barred owls were removed. And where barred owls were not removed, you can see that the lambda is below 1. So the only place throughout the range from Washington, Oregon, and California where demographic data has been collected, the only place where spotted owls are not in decline is where the barred owls were removed from Green Diamond land. So that was also really critical data that suggested that, yes, barred owls are actually a big part of the problem. Let me see if I can. Now I'm having a hard time advancing to the next slide. There we go. So that was the removal studies that I mentioned. I also mentioned that there were these other studies, the ecological owl interaction studies, where they went to this area and the coast range of Oregon, and their area was 975 square kilometers, so it's a huge area. And Dave Wiens led this work. He was a graduate student at the time and published it in 2014. They chose this area because they felt that that at the time they believed that spotted owls and barred owls were about equal in numbers. And so when he began the work, one of his first things to do was to get out on the territories and actually do a complete survey. And what he found, to his dismay, was that barred owls were 4 times as common as spotted owls already in this area. So there were only 21 pairs of spotted owls and 82 pairs of barred owls on this landscape. What he also found that the home ranges of spotted owls were 2 to 5 times larger. So the spotted owls are shown in red here or in pink. And you can see, so the dark area is the core that is around their breeding tree. And then this is the larger area that they use all year round in order to forage. And spotted owls need much, much more land than the barred owls, which have much smaller home ranges and a much smaller breeding range in the middle. So they're able to pack many, many more individuals in the same amount of area. And this just shows the differences in home range size. So here on average, the home ranges were about 1,500 hectares And remember, each hectare is about 2.5 acres. And the barred owl, on the other hand, is only about 500. And so they're outnumbered, and the barred owls need fewer resources. So the other thing that he wanted to look at is the diet, is are they actually competing for the same resources? So if we look at spotted owl diet in terms of number of prey, you can see that about 95% of the prey items are actually mammals, mostly small mammals, about 3% birds and 1% other stuff. On the other hand, the barred owls, only 66% are mammals, and then the rest is birds, amphibians, reptiles, crayfish, fish, insects, and all kinds of other stuff. So they have a much more varied diet. The mean dietary overlap is about 42%. Now, if we also look at diet biomass, what you see is that flying squirrels, the spotted owls have about 50% of their diet is flying squirrels. The rest is wood rats, rabbits, hares, tree voles, and a few other things. And spotted owls, still their favorite food is the flying squirrels and the wood rats, but they'll also eat more rabbits and hares, and they'll also eat coast moles and dug squirrels. So they'll eat some of the larger squirrels and moles. And in addition to that, they also eat a lot of other things. And so that's a really big concern, that they're able to thrive on a much broader diet, and that allows them to do well, even in areas where spotted owls don't do well. The last piece of the puzzle is the reproductive output. One of the questions is how often do spotted owls breed? How many young do they have compared to barred owls? Now, typically spotted owls will breed about once every 2 years, and barred owls will breed about every year. And the average number of fledglings per spotted owl nest is about 1. And so if we multiply these per year, the average spotted owl produces about 0.3 young per year. On the other hand, barred owls, which breed every year and typically will produce 1 to 2, sometimes even 3 young of the year. So their average reproductive output per year is about 1.36. So quite a bit more, about 3 times or about 6 times more young. And then if you also consider that there's more barred owls to begin with, 4 times as many barred owls, and each pair is producing more offspring. The barred owls are producing about 6 times as many young as spotted owls annually on the landscape. And also, all the spotted owls that attempted to nest within 1.5 kilometers of a barred owl's nest failed to produce any young. So there's some hint that the barred owls may be like actively hassling and being antagonistic to the spotted owls and keeping them from breeding successfully. So it's kind of a perfect storm. So one of the things that they were trying to figure out is how the two owls are interacting. And the barred owl is 10 to 20% larger. It's more aggressive. There's indications that barred owls may attack and even kill northern spotted owls, although that's not that common. They require smaller territory so that they can crank out young, even on smaller plots of land than the spotted owls need. They have a more varied generalist diet, and they can do well in areas that don't have as many mammals. They're more of a habitat generalist, so they can do well in deciduous forests, whereas the spotted owls tend to like the more coniferous, the large redwood, dug fir type forests. Barred owls breed more regularly, annually, whereas the spotted owl breeds less often, typically every other year. Barred owls have larger broods of young, 1 to 5, whereas spotted owls only have 1 to 3. They have greater dispersal, and they're already outnumbering spotted owls 4 to 1. So it's kind of a perfect storm, and it seems like almost by every criteria you look at it, the barred owl is outcompeting spotted owl. So what are the main threats from barred owl? Well, competition for food, competition for habitat, but also direct aggression and interference, and simply out-reproducing spotted owls. But there's one other thing too, hybridization. So these owls are pretty close related, and they may be hybridizing. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. There's another question. Well, are barred owls just affecting spotted owls, or are there other other things that they may be affecting too? Well, because the diet is so much broader, there's evidence, and at least 2 different studies have been published showing that barred owls prey on smaller owls. And there's at least a couple papers showing that western screech owls, which are shown here, also decline when barred owls move in. So barred owls are here in solid, and western screech are in the dotted line. And also northern pygmy owl appears to be disappearing in Northern California, where the spotted owls have moved, or where the barred owls have moved in. So it does look like they're having effects on other things. And, you know, because they eat amphibians and, you know, snakes and lots of other things, it's likely that they're going to have impacts on some of those species as well. So, so we know that barred owls are having a huge impact on spotted owls, and, you know, what to do about it is a question we're going to get back to. But because we've been receiving, you know, at this point, you know, hundreds of owls at the Cal Academy, you know, I wanted to talk a little bit about what do you do with a lot of owl specimens that come your way. Well, one thing that's really interesting is that if you take, in fact, all birds, when they first molt new feathers, there are porphyrin pigments which glow a nice pink color under a UV light. And that tells you that these feathers are fresh. But most of those porphyrins break down really quickly in UV light. So the sunlight will break them down, and you can't see these anymore. But owls, because they're active at night, they usually don't open up their wings. And so we've been able to do some really neat molt studies. And we've been able to use this information to figure out how to tell a hatch year bird from a first year bird from a second year or adult bird. And so that was one kind of fun thing that we were able to do with that. And now we're able to age all the birds that come into our care. Another thing that we're able to do is study the parasites of owls. One hypothesis is that the barred owls may be bringing some pathogens or parasites with them to the Western United States. And that might be one of the things that is affecting spotted owls. So we've looked at blood parasites like malaria, Hemoproteus, Plasmodium, and leukocytozoans. We've also looked at other parasites, and this is one that we found that infects the eyes of the owls. And we're working right now with some parasitologists from UC Davis to try and figure out what these are. So when folks in the lab were dissecting the barred owls, they were finding huge numbers of these worms crawling out of the eyes of barred owls. And so we're still not sure what that's all about, and what fitness effects those may have. So that's an active study. Now remember that every bird that we get typically will have some food in its stomach, and we're able to use that to look at the diets of these birds. So we were able to look at about 159 birds from green diamond, and about 70 to 100 from the Hoopa tribal lands where they're removing barred owls. And we did a diet analysis of what these birds were eating. And what we found is that they have a really varied diet. About 51%, based on our studies, are mammals in the diet. And usually the typical players, so northern flying squirrels, dusky-footed wood rats are among the biggest, but also dug squirrels and a variety of shrews and other small mammals. So that's really interesting because they have a much broader diet in terms of mammals. But even the mammal diet is only 51% of the total diet. There are a huge number of birds that barred owls eat, and this is unusual. Spotted owls don't do this, but these include western screech owls and northern pygmy owls, 2 of the smaller owls that are found in those forests. And so, you know, they would probably take things also like western screech owl and northern saw-whet owl, which you find in your park down in the San Pedro Valley. But lots of other birds too are eaten. About 17% of the diet is amphibians, and a variety of different things, from coast giant salamanders to even rough-skinned newts. We published a little paper because these newts are poisonous, and it looks like the barred owls, at least a couple of them, were able to eat them. But they also do eat pond frogs. So we would expect that they might eat things like, you know, red-legged or yellow-legged frogs, where they overlap with them. They also eat a number of reptiles, including garter snakes. And so that's another interesting species in our area that's endangered and, you know, might be affected if the barred owls moved in. And last but not least, invertebrates. There's a huge proportion. Well, it's only 2%, but that's a big proportion compared to the other owls. And they do eat a lot of different things, including shieldback katydids. We had one stomach that had over 200 shieldback katydids in it. And you know, even though that's a big number, it's not each katydid is very small, so it doesn't turn out to be a whole lot of biomass. But it's something that the owls can live on at times and in places where spotted owls might not be able to make it. And you can see they take a lot of other things, and you often see them, you know, feeding along stream sides and digging up all kinds of different things to eat. So this is interesting because it varies a lot from the Oregon study, and that's partially because we were looking at actual stomach contents and they were looking at pellets. And there are a lot of these things that don't get preserved in the pellets. So we feel that our data is much more accurate on what these owls are actually eating. Another study that we've been able to do is, and it requires whole livers or big portions of livers, but we've been able to look at environmental contaminants, including second generation rodenticides. And interestingly, we found, and this is one of our papers that was recently published, that there's evidence of broad food web contamination. And even in some of the most remote areas, we were finding that about on average, and we were looking at birds from 2006 all the way through 2013, a total of 84 livers were sent in for analysis, and about 40% of them showed, you know, high detectable levels of rodenticides. Now, we might have thought that, oh, this makes sense, especially those that are near roads or near human habitation, but that wasn't the case. Some of those that were most affected were in the most remote areas. And it turns out that the source is illegal marijuana grows. So we know that that's a huge problem, and it's actually a growing problem in California. That these are mostly illegal marijuana trespass grows where people go into forests that don't belong to them and set up camp, and they just pepper it with lots of different insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and rodenticides. And these become a big issue, and they get out into the environment and they affect a lot of other things. And in fact, some people are estimating, here's another paper based on barred owl analyses, that this is a really widespread problem in West Coast forests, and it's not just affecting the owls, but owls have been used as a proxy for how the whole food chain is affected. And you know, many of us thought that as these drugs, as cannabis became legal, that it would actually, these problems would go away, but actually the opposite has happened, because now that it's been decriminalized, there's much more demand for cannabis now throughout the entire United States, and the supply chain has not followed in the same to the same capacity. And so there's still a lot of illegal marijuana grows out there, and the numbers are growing. I'm going to kind of skip over this because we're running short on time, and there's some other things I want to get to. But when we started bringing in the specimens, we noticed that the western barred owls look very different than the eastern barred owls shown at the top here. And this is the northern spotted owl. And a lot of people began thinking, oh my gosh, look, they're hybridizing, and they're probably picking up genes from northern spotted owls. And you know, this could be part of the perfect storm, is that they're picking up genes that allow them to adapt to the Western United States and outcompete spotted owls, because they can take the best from both species. And there's also concern that genes from barred owls might get into northern spotted owls. And so because we had the specimens, we wanted to do some of that work as well. And you know, it suggests, you know, there's three different hypotheses that explain this. One is that they may be hybridizing, but two, it may just be that they look different from eastern owls because they went through a genetic bottleneck on their way to the Western United States. And it could also be that they're adapting somehow to the Western United States. And so we actually started with a spotted owl whole genome project, and we got data from an owl that's been in captivity, a spotted owl that's been in captivity in Marin County. And we published the genome. And we looked at a lot of the owls, the Western barred owls, and almost all those owls, everything on this graph along this line are all 100% barred owls genetically. And both Eastern and Western barred owls are all on the same line. And this is our spotted owl. And you can see that the only things that fall in between is one hybrid owl that we knew had a spotted owl parent and a barred owl parent. And this one that we didn't know exactly, but it looks like what we call an F2. So it was a hybrid that had back crossed with a barred owl. And you can see that it has about 25% spotted owl genes in it. But other than that, there's no evidence. If there was actually a hybrid zone and birds were just freely interbreeding, we would see a whole smear of a whole range of genomes ranging between 100% barred owl and 100% spotted owl. And that's not what we were finding. I'm going to skip over a little bit more of this, but this is all just evidence suggesting that they didn't go through a bottleneck, and this just suggests that there probably really isn't much of a hybrid zone. That we find that first generation in a couple of back crosses, but we don't find other cases. So it looks like these hybrids are dead ends, and that they don't persist in the habitat. A couple of other questions before I get to the end is, how did barred owls get to the Western United States? And this is an open question, but remember that barred owls and spotted owls require forest. And if we look at a map of North American forests from the Hansen Forest Cover North American data set, you can see that the Great Plains is a formidable barrier that would have kept spotted owls and barred owls apart for thousands and thousands of years. And so, how would they get from here to here? Well, one possibility is that as climate warmed, it allowed barred owls to move farther and farther northward until they reached an area, a latitude high enough that they could move across the boreal forests of Canada to get to the eastern United States. So that was one hypothesis. And if you look at the points on the map, you can see that that is a possibility. But another possibility, and you can see some points here, even in the Great Plains, where there's a little tiny bit of forest corridor. And one of the other possibility is that they may have moved across where humans have altered the habitat and have grown forests and forest breaks, especially around the Dust Bowl years when they tried to plant more forests to prevent the Dust Bowl. So there's two different potential routes. One, which may have been helped by global climate change, and the other that might have been helped by human alteration of habitat. And this was published by Kent Livesey a few years ago. And so, they may have come north of the Great Plains through the southern boreal forests of Canada. They may have come through the Midwest into Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, but either route was likely made possible by human-caused changes to the environment. And so that's important, because some people, when they think, well, is this just a natural phenomenon? Should we just let the spotted owl go extinct because this is all natural? Well, that's an open question how natural this was, because the barred owls may have invaded the Western United States because of things that humans did on the planet. Another question is, well, how far are the barred owls going to go? And one way that we can study this is by using all the data about where barred owls live in the Eastern United States and trying to formulate a mathematical climate envelope. So using data on rainfall and temperature and seasonality and all the different variables that we can get for each of these points on the map, we can sort of define what a barred owl likes and what a barred owl wants. And then we can turn that equation and ask what areas in the Western United States, basically have that desirable habitat. And what you can see here is that there's almost perfect overlap of northern spotted owl and barred owl preferences, and pretty good overlap with California spotted owl and even Mexican spotted owl. And that's because they mostly like good forest. And so wherever that forest is going to be, that's where barred owls are going to be. So there's not a whole lot of hope that, that barred owls are just going to stop naturally in some place. They're likely to expand throughout the entire range of the spotted owl. So because of all the data that I've already shared with you, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has designed a larger range-wide study. In July 2013, their final environmental impact statement was approved so they could begin the work. And there were 4 different areas, one in Washington, one in Oregon, which is the same area where Dave Wiens did the ecological work that I shared earlier, another area in the northern Klamath Range, and then one area in Northern California. And their plan was over 5 years was to have a paired treatment and control area, and in the treatment area remove every barred owl every year. And they estimate that this could be up to 3,600 owls removed entirely. And of course, that's just from these 4 little areas. This is the Hoopa tribal lands. There were the removal area in California. To date, and there's still 1 more year left in this study, to date, 3,135 owls have been removed. So that's a huge number of owls. And you can see that a lot about 500 in Clay Elm, Washington, the largest in the Coast Ranges where Dave Wiens did his study, but also in Klamath, pretty many. And Hoopa, which is a pretty small area, even had 502 already removed. So a huge number. And these were just updated as of August 31st, 2020. So that's the latest information. So if we look, here you can see this is how well spotted owls are doing from 2004 up to 2018. And the red is where barred owls have been removed, and the blue is where they are not being removed. And of course, the study only began here. So this is just the way that spotted owls are going in Clay Elm. And then you can see that after removal, they're a little bit more stable, and they're continuing to decline where they're not removed. But these numbers are not that different. But you can also see that by 2018, all of the owls in that entire area you can count on 2 hands, which is really sad. So one of the problems is that even though you can remove the barred owls, there's no spotted owls left up there to come back. Here in the Oregon Coast Range, it's a little bit better, and you can see that once you remove the barred owls, the spotted owls begin to increase. But where you don't remove the barred owls, they're continuing to decline to the point where there's almost no spotted owls left. And it's similar in Klamath as well.
John, there's a questioner about the fact that what is wrong with the barred owls? Why are we so concerned about the fact that they're here and this whole dilemma supposedly?
So that is the question that we all have to wrestle with, and that's what I'm going to leave you with at the end, is what is the future of barred owls and spotted owls in the Western United States? And the right now, according to the Endangered Species Act, when a species is about to go extinct or looks like it's very likely to go extinct, by law, they have to figure out what are the primary threats and how do you save those species from going extinct. And right now, the spotted owl is on the brink of extinction, and it's heading downward very, very rapidly. And it looks like one of the biggest threats is the barred owl. And so by law, they're required to figure out how to address that threat. And so they're trying to do this by trying to figure out, are there areas that you can defend from barred owls? Are there some areas that maybe barred owls will never move into, and that can be a spotted owl refuge? It's not looking very promising, but that's another thing that they're trying to look at. And another thing that they're trying to do is say, is management of barred owls a reasonable strategy? Okay. And so, they are thinking, and they're going to pose this to the public and say, here are our different plans. And then there'll be an opportunity, whenever there's a plan like this, then there's an opportunity for public comment, and the public can decide, do we want to do this? Do we not want to do this? Do we want to continue to kill barred owls to save a spotted owl, or don't we? And I think this is a really important question, because as we continue to affect climate, as we continue to shift things on the earth, what's happening is that invasive species in dandelions and European collared doves and a lot of other species are coming in, and they're pushing out the things that used to live here, and we're losing a lot of our native species. I just got back from a trip from Hawaii, and there were almost no native bird species that I could see. It was almost all introduced species. And the same is true for plants on much of those islands. And so the question is that something that we're happy with? Are we happy to see many of our native species going extinct? Or are we willing to do something about it? And then the question is how far are you willing to go? And what is the right thing to do? And I think It's important to note that, you know, many birds are killed annually under depredation permits each year. And here's some data from the number of birds that were killed under depredation permits between 2011 and 2013. Some of these are to try and do conservation, but many of these are, that's how many you can kill if you have power lines and you don't like these birds around your power lines, or if you're seeing red-winged blackbirds coming to your cornfields. And if we're willing to kill 260,000 red-winged blackbirds in a year, you know, so that people can farm their lands a little bit more easily, you know, is it reasonable to kill 3,000 owls in a couple of years in order to save a species that's about to go extinct? Again, I don't know the answer to this, and I think everyone's going to have to be involved in these discussions, because I think that this is an important conversation that we need to have now. If we look at Kirtland's warbler, which is a really important bird species, which was on the brink of extinction, and they were down to about 100 breeding individuals a couple decades ago. And they ended up having to remove, over the course of their efforts, over 100,000 brown-headed cowbirds in order to try and save the Kirtland's warbler. And they were successful, and that the Kirtland's warbler is doing very well now. And they were able to learn some other things about how to save them in the meantime, and they're on the road to recovery. So, you know, the real question here is, you know, what do we want our land to look like in the future? And, you know, are we happy to have any green space? Or do we actually want to try and preserve the biodiversity and the genetic heritage, the things that evolved to live in California? Or are we just as happy to have, you know, the barred owls move in? And remember, you know, in your park, you don't have spotted owls, but you do have western screech owls, and you do have northern saw-whet owls. And if barred owls move in, they're just larger enough that they might drive those two species of owls out. And they also feed on, you know, garter snakes, and we have an endangered garter snake down where you are, the San Francisco garter snake. And you also have frogs that are an endangered species. So you have two different vertebrate endangered species that would likely be affected by them, and you have two different owl species that aren't endangered, or at least not yet, but they, you know, could be affected by a barred owl. And definitely having, you know, new species in the habitat can have a lot of other unpredictable effects. But, you know, that's the way things are going now too, is that as we change climate, more and more species are moving around. So I'm just going to leave you with that question and let you know that, you know, a lot of different people have contributed to the work, and the data that I've shared is from a lot of different people. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is really wrestling with this question right now. And they're going to pose a whole bunch of different solutions. And, you know, because these are big, charismatic birds, I don't know what people are going to, you know, feel comfortable with. But I think it's important for us all to be involved, and it's important for us all to be active, because if we don't get involved, you know, I think that a lot of our habitats are not going to go to a good place. And I think that we have to. Here's one last thought that I'll leave you with. A lot of people say, you know, why are we playing God? We shouldn't be playing God like this and choosing one species over another. But I would posit to you that we've been playing God for centuries, but we're really terrible gods. We're adolescent gods, and we don't know what we're doing, and we're knocking over the important furniture, and we're breaking the vases. And we need to own up to the fact that our impact on the earth is huge, and we need to be thoughtful and wise about the choices that we make, recognizing the fact that we are like gods on the landscape, and that we need to do a better job of choosing our destiny and the destiny of our earth. And what that's going to be is all, of course, up to us, but we shouldn't just do things willy-nilly and let it all just happen by chance. That I think we need to be deliberate and thoughtful. So I'll leave it there, and I have lots of time, and I would love to have a discussion and hear from all the folks in the audience. And thank you for bearing with me for all that time.
Well, thank you so much. That was terrific. And with the Strix varia, the fact that it's repeated twice, there was a question about why it's repeated twice.
So, so Strix is the genus name, varia is the species name, and then there are 4 different subspecies. But the first, one of those subspecies is the so-called nominate, which has the same name as the genus. So that's why it's Strix varia. There's also, Strix varia and 3 other subspecies that will have different names.
Do the subspecies interbreed?
The subspecies do interbreed, and in fact, there's been some genetic work suggesting that the different subspecies of Strix varia aren't that different genetically, and that they probably don't even deserve the different names. However, the spotted owls do appear to be very genetically distinct. So the northern spotted owl seems to be more genetically distinct from California spotted owl, which is very genetically distinct from the Mexican spotted owl. So those do seem to be good groups.
And there's a question about moving, somehow getting the owls back or relocating the barred owls to the East Coast or somewhere away from the West Coast.
Right. So
further away from us? Is it feasible even?
Yeah, so that was something that they thought about at the very beginning when they wanted to do the removal experiments. But it turns out that they're very hard to catch. And then once you have them in captivity, you can't just, it's very unwise to move species around long distances because they often will pick up parasites or diseases in an area. And you can end up spreading diseases that way very easily. And there's lots of examples of that in the literature. So Fish and Wildlife Service, California Fish and Game would never let that happen because they've learned the hard way that can be a very bad idea. The other thing is that, I mean, even with the range-wide study, they've removed over 3,100, and that's a lot of owls to try and relocate. And in their typical habitat in the eastern United States, that habitat's already full and all the territories are taken. And that there's already a bunch of floaters in the habitat. So you're generally not doing individuals a whole. It makes us feel good, right? We say, oh, we did this and we didn't have to kill anything. But in the end, you end up killing them, but they have a very long, drawn out, starved to death kind of existence because you're packing too many of them in a habitat that can't really support them.
So in reality, this whole change, as you were mentioning, the fact that in sort of invasive or plants, flora, fauna that was not usually in here is now coming in, and it's basically due to our interventions.
That's what it looks like, but again, that's kind of an open question. We don't know exactly how the barred owls got out here, and people have just been looking at data. And the only papers that I know of that really talk about that are the ones from Kent Livesey, and he suggests those 2 different pathways. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the folks who've thought about this a lot. Those are the 2 things that they've thought about. But nobody brought them out here. They did move on their own, and even though, humans have changed climate, they are moving with climate, and the climate is still changing. So, that's an open question too. Like maybe, things are going to move, and, if they're better adapted, maybe that's a good thing. That these are all questions we have to wrap our minds around. What we do know is that, in a particular habitat, when things have had, 10 million years or 5 million years, the ecosystem works well. It's like a well-oiled machine, and the right amount of prey and the right amount of predators are all on the landscape. But what happens is when you bring in a whole lot of things, new species from outside, they're going to have unknown effects, and they might drive certain things extinct, and they might take off, and they might not have any of their own predators. And so their numbers can get artificially large, and they can do a lot of damage before their populations end up crashing and coming down to a more realistic level. And that's one of the things we may be seeing now too. So we have the folks who are doing the big long-term study, the big range-wide study, they have one more year to go. And one of the things that they're seeing is that up north, the populations of barred owls are beginning to decline, possibly on their own. And it may be that those other ecological factors, that they've overshot their carrying capacity, and now the numbers are coming back to a more realistic size. But in the meantime, when their numbers were high, they were able to pretty much, drive the spotted owls extinct. And so, they're still trying to wrestle with all this too, and trying to understand what all this data means. But these are the challenges with introduced species, is that the species in the ecosystem that's there already doesn't know how to deal with them. And so when they come, the new species generally don't have pathogens. If they do have pathogens, they don't affect that species very much, but they might affect the other things. So they can spread diseases, but they're usually not as affected by this diseases that they're carrying. They will affect the food chain in ways that can be very disruptive. And, all you have to do is look along many of the paths that you walk. In Marin County, in the last 5 years, a lot of the trails have become overgrown with French broom and Scotch broom. And that's a perfect example. And many of the things that used to live along the trails are gone, and the French broom is starting to move into the forest more. I don't know that we'll ever get a handle on that, but a lot of things that the hikers that are older than me say, oh, we used to see all these, this particular flower, and we just don't see it anymore because the Scotch broom is taking it over. But this is a very common thing. In fact, if you look up in invasive species online, you'll see that one of the biggest threats to native species is invasive species, and there's examples all around the world of
that there are. Of course, the California Native Plant Society is very active in trying to with all the chapters, trying to tamp down on invasive plants wherever they can, and but some successfully, and some perhaps not so successfully. But wherever you have disturbed soil, the weeds come in. Yeah, unfortunately. And spotted owls, is it possible to breed them in captivity? And is it possible to reintroduce them into their ranges?
Yeah, both of those things are possible. It would take a lot, and even if you could keep them in captivity and reintroduce them, you'd have to make sure that there was habitat for them to be reintroduced into, and so you would still have the same issue, but at least you could keep the species going in captivity.
Yeah, and removal for the individual, I suppose for the individual itself, if we're saying that we're removing them in a study, we're just killing them. As for removal of a species, well, we're really not able to do that yet. Yeah.
And so here's a question, and I can't really do this in this environment, but back when Fish and Wildlife Service was just planning the large range-wide study, I gave a talk at Berkeley and to the Audubon Society, and then too we were like, I don't, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? How do people feel about this? And somebody from the audience says, why don't you ask everybody? We'll take a poll. And there were almost 300 people in that audience. So I asked them, I said, how would people feel if there was a 5-year range-wide study that allowed them to collect up to 3,600 owls in order to answer the question, is the barred owl, a big impactor of spotted owls? And about 2/3 of the people said, yes, they would support that study that has a defined ending and it has a scientific purpose. And I said, okay, now let's change the question. And let's say that the study is all done and it's really clear that the only way to save spotted owls is to kill barred owls. And it's going to have to be a long-term, indefinite, into the future removal of many more thousands of barred owls. How many people would get behind managing barred owls to save spotted owls? And it totally flipped. And only about a third of people in the audience would be willing to kill barred owls to save spotted owls if it meant long-term removals and range-wide removals. So that was really interesting, and I think it tells us a little bit about how we feel about these issues, and and again, like I'm not even sure how I feel about it. Like, I do worry about species going extinct, and I worry a lot about, I feel like the one thing that we as Californians can do is try and keep the Californian biota alive. And, people from New Zealand, it's their job to keep the kiwis and the kakapos and, all the cool New Zealand things alive. And if everybody does that for their own areas, we can maintain a lot of the biodiversity that the earth used to have. But some people don't even, there are a lot of people who just say, heck, everything's moving around. I give up. Just let everything go where it's going to go, and evolution will sort it all out. And, that is one approach. And, and I think, we live in a democracy. So, so I think we all really do need to wrap our minds around what does this mean? What does it cost? What are the pros and cons? And I think,
But do we even understand what the pros and cons actually are?
Well, at this point, I would say we don't yet, but hopefully when this 5-year study is, in fact, it's almost 6 years because there's been some delays and a couple of years when things didn't happen at the right level. So, we never know everything, do we?
No.
But at some point we'll know enough, to know. We do know that if we don't do something, the spotted owls are going to be gone, and
right.
Probably in my lifetime.
John, there's a question about potential predators of the barred owls in the western region. Would they eventually perhaps encounter something that would
Probably not. They're kind of top predators, in their food chain. There aren't too many things that would eat them. Great horned owls could potentially kill them, but great horned owls are forest edge species, so they don't really go into the forest interior very much. They might be able to pick off one or, a small number if they venture out or when they're dispersing, but I don't think that they would have the capacity to really keep the numbers down. Diseases might actually have an impact, but most things, there's always it's hard for diseases to actually drive a species extinct because there's coevolution. There's kind of an arms race that happens between diseases and the species that the host species.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know that in some parts of the world, they've tried to introduce a predator, something got introduced there, and then they would try and introduce a predator to eat them. For example, cane toads were introduced into Australia, and then they, introduced some snakes to kill the cane toads. And in the end, the snake did as much damage as the cane toad. And there's lots of stories like that.
Yes, and in Hawaii, heavens knows, we went wrong with many introductions.
Yep, the mongoose to kill the rats, and the mongoose ended up doing more damage than the rats, and on and on. So, but there have been some successful control introductions. Not that many, but there have been a few, and we're more cautious about those things when they're done today. But I don't know that I can't think of anything that could control barred owls on a range-wide level.
Is there anything affecting, why would the barred owls actually leave the East Coast if they have forests? Is it just a need for more habitat? And if or do they need
Well, you know,
cause issues over there because they're in their native habitat. So as such, they probably are there's a balance on the East Coast.
well, you know, it's not like there's a fence there that the barred owls see and decide, do I go over the fence or do I stay? You know, it's when birds disperse, they just randomly go off in different directions. And if the habitat is good and they can survive, they will. And so, you know, probably what's happened is as, you know, as the temperatures have risen and barred owls were able to thrive further and further north, they just, you know, by Brown motion, just continued to disperse and do well in those habitats and spread. So, and you know, there are a lot of owls in it. In fact, barred owls are one of my favorite species from the eastern United States. I grew up in Ohio, and like that is the sound of the eastern forest that I just love. And I didn't do their call, but they have a really wonderful 8-note hoot, which sounds like "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you?" And it goes.
Oh, wow. That's terrific.
And so listen for that too, because if you ever hear that, you know, down in your park, you should definitely report it. There'll be people who are very interested in their spread, and once they get, you know, south of the Golden Gate, they'll be able to spread down into Big Sur and in the mountains down there. And I mean, I think that's going to happen. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't happened already, but I'm sure it will soon.
So in reality, it hasn't really taken that many decades for the barred owl to cross the continent.
No, well, you know, there's debates about, you know, when they reach different areas, but you know, I think it was the late 60s that they were in Washington, and I think the first one was seen in Northern California in the mid 80s. So yeah, it doesn't take that long for them to spread, and now they are the dominant owl along the coast of California. So they move quickly, they breed well, they're very fecund.
It's very much like corvids, the corvids,
the crows and ravens.
Yes.
You know, they're a really interesting case too, because you know, the corvids saw a big decline when West Nile virus came through, but they've rebounded really well afterwards. And I think they went through a little bit of a bottleneck, and the ones that continued to do well were associated with cities and parks, and so they do very well now in you know, around where humans live, and their numbers seem to have really, you know, thrived and gone up around where humans live, cities, suburbs. I get calls all the time at the academy from folks that are like, there seems like there's more crows than I remember when I was a kid, and they seem to be really spreading.
And they're way larger, because I remember traveling with Adrian, and like when we were at Bryce Canyon and we saw a huge raven. It's like absolutely humongous, and now they're here. It's like the same huge sized raven that you would never imagine seeing. They're now here and proliferating and being very successful at establishing themselves. You know, but it was eye-boggling not that long ago, you know, just to be able to come across something that big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they're really interesting too. They're fascinating species.
Yes, they are. Well, let's see.
Well, so this is just very much an invitation, because I think that, you know, when it comes to picking dandelions or picking French broom, like, you know, people don't think that much about it. But when it comes to like a big, charismatic, beautiful owl, you know, a vertebrate species that's cute and has big eyes and is fuzzy, you know, it makes us think really differently about it. And I think, you know, I think we do need to wrap our minds around, you know, what does it mean to be stewards of the landscape, and, you know, how do we be stewards, and how do we choose for our park? What is the future of our park? Do we just want it to be green in a place where our dogs can be happy, or do we want it to be, do we want it to be a refuge for species that are endangered, or do we want it to be, what is it we want from our local parks and from our, national parks and from, our other lands? And, there are a lot of demands, and it's a really open question. And so I just encourage everyone to think about that and be involved in at whatever level you would like to be, and educate yourself about these issues, and speak up for whatever you think is right. And I know that we all come in at different points and levels based on our understanding and what are our first priorities. But I think that this is important because Fish and Wildlife Service has lots of these kinds of decisions to make. There's another really interesting one in Hawaii, where there's a native hawk, which is endangered, and there's a native crow, which is endangered. And the crows will depredate the hawk's nest, and the hawks will kill the adult crows and feed on them. And so trying to keep those two species alive has been a real challenge for them. In the past, where there was tons of habitat, there could be winners and losers in one place, but in the other places it would be different winners and losers. And if it played out in enough habitat, both species could persist for long periods. But now with, so much of our land being converted to other things, what happens in these tiny pockets, ends up being, 90% of the population, or huge percentages of the population, and it determines the fates of species. So, we do have to think about these things, and we do have to be managers.
There is one question about U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Is that the only organization that decides whether or not to remove barred owls?
No. Well, right now, all the work that's being done in California has to have permits from the California Department of Fish and Game, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So, the state has to work with the feds. And I'd say that there's also, multiple federal agencies involved too. There's USGS, and USGS is actually the ones who are running the range-wide study and doing the removals right now. So that's the U.S. Geological Survey. And they have this branch called the Natural Sciences Branch, or the Natural History Survey, I think they call it. And so they're involved, but ultimately it'll all be. So I should tell you this. I think it was about 2 years ago. There's 3 different groups that were put together to think about this issue. There's an interagency working group. And that's members of the National Park System, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, Bureau of Land Management, et cetera. So all the different agencies that have a stake in this. There's a barred owl science team, and that's a group of about 20 different scientists who study barred owls and spotted owls, and who are gathering all of the data that they can. And they're trying to see where there's missing data, or where they need more information, and trying to tell Fish and Wildlife Service and the other agencies, like, we need this data, we need this question answered, you guys figure out how to do it. But and I'm actually a member of that group, and that was put together by the interagency working group. And then there's a third group that's called the Northern Spotted Owl Working Group, and that's basically all the other stakeholders. It's landowners, the timber industry, the mining industry, the non-government organizations, groups like yours, World Wildlife Fund, Conservation International. All those groups are part of that group, and they meet annually to talk about all these issues. And so together, these 3 groups are kind of bouncing off of each other and trying to come up with what should happen. And even when they decide what should happen, they'll come up with a species survival plan. They'll update the species survival plan for the northern spotted owl. And when they roll it out, it'll have to go through all of the government vetting that all the other plans have to go through. So it's very bureaucratic, and if they decide management is an option, they'll lay out what that option looks like, and then the public can all weigh in and say, you know, here's what we have a real problem with option B, the you know, management option, and here's why. You know, and they can say, we prefer option C, which is, you know, this other wait and see option, or we prefer, you know, managing the habitat so that it can support barred owls and not, or support spotted owls but not barred owls, or, you know, so they'll try and put together these different kinds of options and some kind of a plan. And I think we're still, you know, a couple years out from seeing any sort of plan like that emerge, but you know, when it comes up, I think that would be the time to really get involved and try and weigh in. And, you know, there are lots of groups who've been watching this. PETA's been watching it, and they've been very involved. And, you know, Audubon Society has been watching it, and they've been involved in weighing in. And, you know, lots of other, you know, NGOs have been involved in. And,
Thank you. In our park, we do have, as you said, we do have great horned owls. Do they have any effect on the screech owls? The western screech owls?
No, they kind of don't. And there's an interesting thing that, you know, in ecology, that they talk about the differences between species. So you know, the smaller owls are just the right size that, you know, it's hard for a spotted owl to eat them, and it's hard for a great horned owl to eat a spotted owl, and so they've kind of evolved to do different things, and to be hard to get wiped out by the other things. And the problem is that the barred owl is just big enough, just bigger than a spotted owl enough that it can be a formidable predator to the smaller owls. And the smaller owls evolved to be their size, and they evolved that niche because there was the spotted owl that was in that bigger position. So and that's just how ecology over, you know, many centuries or thousands of years, you know, the animals all kind of evolved to be, you know, the right size, so that they're doing something different, that they have a unique niche, and they're you know, can't be driven extinct by the other species in their habitat, or else they would have been driven extinct. That's what happens when you have new things that jump in. You know, they you know, so for example, the barred owl might be, you know, big enough that the great horned owl can't wipe it out. But, you know, big enough that it can actually effectively depredate a, you know, northern pygmy owl or a western screech owl.
Well, John, thank you so much. We've had some terrific comments about how informative and how thought-provoking this lecture has been. And so we all thank you for joining us, and especially for having all this extra time with the Q&A, which has been most helpful.
Oh, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining and hearing the story. I just think it's really fascinating. And like I said, I don't know the answer. So thank you for being involved, for being engaged in your local parks, because that's where we really can have a big difference, right? Is locally, where we make these decisions every day about how to manage our parks. So stay involved, keep enjoying the San Pedro Valley Park, and I hope to see you out there on the trail one day.
All right. Well, thank you all. And so you can sign off, and I'm not quite sure how I can just.
I might have to stop sharing. I'll do that.
Yes. There we go. Okay.
All righty. Well, thanks, Mila. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you. I do have some biology background, so it's fascinating to hear all of this. And I was listening to the radio today, and about they're voting in New Zealand for the bird of the year. I thought that was absolutely the most incredible thing. And they're stuffing ballots, and they're doing all sorts of things in regards to this whole election, which is like totally, you think, who would be this passionate about selecting the bird of the year? But they're super passionate back there.
They're really passionate. In fact, they've been one of the most active about their native flora and fauna, because they, you know, they've lost so much there, and they know how much more they have to lose, and so they've been really active. And
New Zealanders are terrific. You know, I mean, these Kiwis are just absolutely fantastic. Let me just, there we go. I know, where is it here?